right. Hello. A very, very warm welcome to our webinar, Leading Change in Resource Management. My name is Nora, and I'm pleased to be your host for this webinar. My passion is to unleash the potential of organizations and people by tapping into the future of work and creating more productive, more adaptive, human, and joyful ways of working. I'm very excited you're all joining us today for what I believe will be an extremely insightful session. Before we kick off, I would love to get a sense for who's with us here in this virtual room. And I've prepared a little check-in question, which goes, what's one word that describes how you feel on the topic of change? So I invite you to share how you feel about change in one word in the chat. First answer is coming in. Excited. That's a beautiful response, Shell. Ready, Pedro says. Love it. Curious. That's a beautiful attitude. Another ready from Jen. I feel like you should be joining our panel in that instance. Growth, says Michelle. Beautiful. Jennifer uses 2 words. That's fine too. Love it. Necessary, unavoidable, bring it, opportunity, exhausting, planning. The overall vibe I'm getting is a lot of energy in this space and an optimistic mindset on change. Love it. Thank you so much for checking in with us. It's always interesting. And let's see how we can weave those emotions into our webinar today. This webinar is part of RAN's webinar series called LEAP, Igniting the Future of Resource Management. And the goal of this webinar series is to reinvent the traditional approach to resource management and unpack fresh and inspiring perspectives for you, for our resource management community, on how this might look like. And this webinar program is brought to you by RAN, a resource management software, solving the challenge of matching work to be done and finding the best suited people for the job. And I just want to call out that there is an opportunity to meet the team of runners at the upcoming RMI Summit on April 23rd to 24th in Indianapolis. So make sure to reach out to us. If you're there, we would love to connect with you. We will be using the last 15 minutes of this webinar for any questions that you might have. So please, as you listen carefully to this conversation, feel free to already start capturing your questions in the Q&A section of Zoom webinar. So there is a specific button called Q&A. Feel free to use this specific button, and you can use the chat to share any thoughts that you might have. It's always really interesting to see what you're thinking, what's resonating. So just make sure when you're sending something via the chat to send it to everyone. You can select everyone instead of just the host and panelists, so everyone can benefit from whatever you're sharing. Next up, I would love to introduce the stars of this webinar. We've got 2 phenomenal speakers lined up. First of all, we've got the wonderful Raul Sirimana. He is based in Toronto and serves as Director of Delivery Excellence at the Royal Bank of Canada. With over 6 years of operational and transformational experience in risk management and finance, he has a proven track record of leading cross-functional strategic initiatives and unlocking sustainable business value. Raul specializes in strategic portfolio management, financial planning, risk management, and change enablement. This makes him the perfect candidate for our webinar today. So Raul, it's lovely to have you on the webinar. Thank you for joining us.
Of course, thank you. Look forward to it.
And the second panelist I'm very excited to welcome is the wonderful Kent Frazier. He is a solo dad, co-parent of 2 beautiful kids. He's based in Denver, Colorado, and is a former HR executive, now serving as the co-founder and CEO of Paradox Edge, a transformative coaching and consulting practice, creating more fully human workplaces, homes, and communities. Kent has carved a niche in developing leaders of change in the messy middle of getting hard things done. He offers a deliberately developmental, practical way of building trust, harnessing creative tension, maximizing collaboration and creativity while driving results in high-stakes scenarios. His clients include Amazon Web Services, Biomed Reality, Davita, and many more. So we're very happy for him to be here and to share all of those beautiful experiences in our webinar today. Great to have you on the panel, Kent.
Thank you, Nora. Appreciate the invitation.
Awesome. So let's kick right into it. I would love to kick off. We're talking about change, and more specifically, we're talking about resource management and change. And Raul, on your journey at the Royal Bank of Canada, you have been part of a very, I find, inspiring process. So let's start with really unpacking this case study of what happened at RBC. I would love to unpack the change process and journey you've been on. So what was the starting point for changing the way that the RBC did resource management? And what was the goal behind the change? Could you share a bit of that journey with us?
Yes, no, absolutely, Nora. And I'm excited to be here. And, based on the first question, I think a lot of those, emotions and feelings about change are all relevant. And I hope I can shed some light into a lot of those today. Just looking back at the journey that RBC has been on, I'll provide a bit of context as to what was the impetus for this change. First is that RBC has been one of the financial institutions in the world that has been growing at a very rapid pace, especially in the US. Between 2020 and 2024, one of our subsidiaries became one of the larger banks in the US. What that meant is there's obviously heightened expectations from the bank from a regulatory perspective, and this means that we need resources to be able to meet that demand. And if you recall, during 2020, there were special moments in all of our lives, such as the pandemic. And then there was also another thing that was the war on talent. So there was a mass amount of opportunities for people to move around during that time. And one of the challenges we had was the fact that there was a lot of turnover. So that was one of the key drivers for change. There was also a lot of burnout at that time. A lot of people were cooped up in their homes, and they were having to work long hours in their homes, in their small office spaces. And this had a big impact on people as well. So there was a lot of burnout. And naturally, as organizations grow and they're not able to meet resource demands internally, what tends to happen is we look externally to be able to bring resources. So within our audit shop at RBC, we went to external third parties, so such as the Big Four, any other consulting firms that were willing to basically lend their resources to RBC to be able to meet these short-term demands. Well, what tends to happen is they become very costly than hiring folks internally, right? So that's sort of setting the backdrop of why we needed the change. And in terms of the goal there was a couple of things that we really wanted to focus on from a resource management and change perspective. So first is that we wanted to reduce costs. And what that meant was the fact that we want to be able to share resources across RBC. And specifically within the internal audit shop, there's about 700 different employees across 30 plus different teams. So we want to be able to dynamically resource, which will enable us to reduce costs. So if there's any resources available on team A, we're able to actually bring them into team B instead of going outside of the organization. So this created amazing transparency through the Run tool that's allowing us to essentially be able to resource dynamically. And that was one of the big goals. And I'll obviously go through what that change process looked like. But yeah, that's ultimately the goal, to be able to reduce costs, increase transparency. And I think one of the byproducts of all this is going to be the fact that people are much happier in an organization that supports them in that way, and low burnout, and they're likely to stick around which will help the overall organization, of course.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for setting the scene. And it's so interesting to understand that the change that you implemented impacted your division of 700 people. So that's quite a large unit. And yeah, thank you for outlining the kind of drivers around a business that was rapidly growing, which is actually the dream, right? That's what we want, but at the same time, having a high impact on the people, which had negative impacts. So when we look at this, what did your change process look like when you adopted Run? Which stages did you go through? And what did you learn along that journey?
Yeah, and I think this is also Kent's area of specialty as well, because I think one of the key things when it came to the change process is to really take a user-centric approach.
Nice.
So as I reflect back, and this is a great moment to reflect back, because we've been able to implement it fairly successfully in the organization. So where we started was with the user stories, really being able to sit down with individuals who are involved or are responsible for managing resources within each of those 30 plus teams. We needed to sit them and understand their pain points and really get to the human element of it. What is really impacting them on a day-to-day basis, and then getting into the process of what they have to do in order to be able to achieve their objective, and how painful that is. And sometimes it's very cumbersome, administratively burdensome, and we wanted to really be able to understand that. So we started with the people, and you'll also see that we also end with the people as well. So really understanding the pain points. And then the next part of it was, I would say, the vendor selection, right? And the Run team will recall, obviously, the sales team specifically, that we actually brought in about 20 different schedulers from the organization to sit in on the demos. So really making the users part of the co-creation, right? Having them understand, hey, these are the pain points that you told us, and now is this potential tool going to help us with that, right? So they really feel engaged through and through the process.
Fantastic
and we're just
point.
basically, yeah, and as a strategic initiatives group, we're just sort of the enablers, but they're going to be the consumer. So it's important that they had a seat at the table. And I think one of the key things that I also wanted to mention today was the fact that you have to go slow in the beginning to be able to go fast later, right? And what I mean by that is the fact that we spent a lot of time with the pilot process. A lot of people tend to, pilot for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, and then jump into production. But we really wanted to make sure that we got this right. So we spent almost 8 months piloting Run from a technology perspective, from a process perspective, and making sure that we were able to make the enhancements that we needed to in order to make sure that it was in a right position to be able to productionize. So the pilot part was key. Again, I will go back to it, and Kent will love this, is the fact that it's always about the user. And I would say, that's basically the change process that we started with. And I'll go through implementation a bit later, but we really wanted to start with the pilots and really make sure that I was in a good position to be able to productionize. Kent, I'm not sure if you have anything to add here as well, just from a people side perspective as well, because that was a key.
Yeah, thank you, Raul. I really love the way you were speaking to inviting the users, understanding what the human pain is, and inviting people to be part of crafting the future that we're going to move into together. That's such an important part of leadership when we're inviting people to do things differently, is invite their voices to be part of shaping that future, so they don't feel like it's something that's being done to them. It's it's something we're doing together.
Yeah, very nice.
Great
And
point.
Raul, could you paint the picture a bit more on how the pilot phase looked like? So in these 8 months, what happened after you collected the pain points and you went through the vendor selection? Once you had basically selected a vendor, how did you move forward using the pilot approach?
Yeah, for sure. So we have about, in the production or stage, or let's say like the current state, we have about 70 schedulers, and we have a dedicated resource manager as well. But what we wanted to do was during the pilot stage, we wanted to bring in about 20 of them into the group. So we had them actually, we actually loaded up Run with our projects, with our resources, and in the pilot environment for users to be able to go in and actually do scheduling as if they were using the tool on a day-to-day basis. What this gave us was the fact that people got a feel for what it is like to be on the tool. When you start to pilot, people also tend to get questions. Hey, can we do this enhancement? Can we do that enhancement in the tool? So we actually had a very iterative approach where we would basically every 2 weeks we would meet with the users and identify what are the potential enhancements we do want to make before we go into production. So that was one of the key things that we were able to take a very agile approach and test and iterate until we got to a position where people felt comfortable. And I know we have this, coming up a bit later as well. But one of the other things was when you have a pilot that's coming up, there's going to be lots of questions from leadership, right? So we wanted to really make sure that they feel very engaged in the pilot process as well. Because a lot of the key things that they're looking for is, hey, what are my utilization reports? Can I be able to identify resources available in another team? So those are some of the questions that they were asking. So we almost felt that by the time the pilot stage was done, that we were nearly in production. So that's how we approach the pilot process. So continuous improvements to the process, but at the same time making sure everyone's going to be aligned as to what's going to be expected in production. And the last thing I'll mention here from a pilot perspective is the fact that we really needed to make sure that the pilot users were inherently bought into the process. They truly need to believe that this is going to be the end state, and they need to feel confident in it. And because at the end of the day, they're going to be our advocates and endorse the endorsement that we need when we have to scale out. So that was one of the key things that we wanted to achieve in the pilot as well.
And may I ask, Raul, how did you select these 20 schedulers out of the group of 70? I understood it's a larger group of 70, and you selected 20 to be very close to this pilot process. What was your mechanism of inviting those 20 along?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good question, right? So I think when I look back at it, one of the key things we wanted to do was make sure there's representation. And what I mean by that is representation regionally, because as you know, we're a global bank. We have operations in the U.S., the U.K., Asia Pacific, the Caribbean, and Canada. So we wanted to make sure that there's representation from each of those regions, because the resourcing gets done differently. There's cultural differences between the operations, so we wanted to take those into account. The other thing was also making sure that there's a representation from each of the leaders within the team. So we have about, I believe there's about 15 to 20 different executives. So we wanted to make sure there was someone that was representing their viewpoint from there. And that was key as well, because when they take it back, we want to be able to make sure that the leaders are being heard, and then they have someone that representing their team. So that was the selection process for us.
Fantastic, thank you. And if we just look at this phase, so we've got about 8 months of piloting, and how long did the, let's say, execution phase afterwards take in terms of time horizon? How long?
Yeah, so, and I think that was an interesting part, because once we completed the pilots, the scale up or the implementation actually didn't take too long. So we actually only spent about 2 to 3 months on implementation. And it's actually quite interesting, because it wasn't just on the people side that we needed to implement and train. We also needed to make sure that the technology, the APIs were connected to our own systems. Right? But one of the good things that we did is in the pilot, we not only tested the process and how to use Run, but we also wanted to make sure that there was technical integration that we tested as well. So it's almost like a flip of a button when we came to implementation that, hey, we were ready to go. And it was just a matter of just marketing and training folks. And that's what the 2 to 3 months were dedicated on, because we didn't run into too many challenges during implementation. So,
because you already were set up for success through the piloting phase. So I just want to reiterate, I loved your point around slow in the beginning to be really quick in the delivery execution phase. So I think that really, I can see how it paid off so much on your journey. Very nice. And if we consider these roughly 10 to 11 months of introducing change, kicking off the change for this part of the business of RBC, what were some challenges that you faced on that journey?
Yeah, certainly. So I would say one of the big things was the fact that when it came to, I think I mentioned this, was the fact that a lot of the pilot users were bought into the process. So, they truly believed and they really understood the benefits of what the tool can bring in, what the process can bring in. But when we start to scale up, there's obviously going to be those net 50 individuals that also need to be bought in. There's also leaders that need to make sure that they're aware of the tool and everything. So the scaling part, in terms of change management, we did spend quite a bit of time, but it started at almost the pilot stage, right? So we started during the pilot stage, starting to educate people, start marketing what the tool can bring. So that was one of the key challenges that we had, was the fact that, sorry, just the lights turned on. Let me move a little bit. So like I was saying, we need to really make sure that we can articulate the benefits to some of the users that haven't been able to get on the tool just yet.
Yeah.
And one of the other challenges was the fact that we needed to have a lot of patience as we iterated the tool. So what I meant is, like, I think I'll go back to the pilot stage, because a lot of the challenges came up there and we addressed them during the pilot stage.
Right.
So as we were iterating, we needed to make sure that the pilot users were patient as these enhancements were being made to the tool, so we can make sure that their feedback was incorporated.
Right.
So that was one of the key things as well, just making sure that we can keep them engaged. Even though this is not going to be the end product, we needed to keep them engaged through the ups and downs of what the tool had to provide, as well as the process.
I love that.
So I would say the marketing aspect and just keeping people engaged was one of the key things from a pilot perspective.
Yeah,
Those were the
phenomenal.
challenges.
Thank you so much. And before we dive into what we can do to engage employees along the journey and how to keep the excitement and momentum up, let's focus on the role of leadership. And here, Kent, I'm really looking for your input as well. So in a process of changing, here specifically changing the way resource management is done, what is the role of leadership in such a process? And what are some effective strategies for leaders in the context of change from your experience, Kent?
Yeah, thank you. Raul was touching on some of these already, so I'm going to play human highlighter on some of the things I heard him speak.
Yeah, nice.
Well, to, first is being clear on why. Why are we doing this? And I heard Raul speak very clearly to, we're looking to be able to reduce costs and to be able to more dynamically share resources. Right. So, having a real clear purpose or reason why that people believe in. This is another thing I heard Raul say, is like, hey, we had our end users believed in what we were up to, and they understood what we were up to. So those things are some of the most critical elements for any change initiative, is why we're doing it. People feel heard. I heard Raul speak to that as well. During this pilot phase, we were continuously getting feedback and asking for enhancements. We were having those hard conversations before we were in a production environment.
Yes,
Beautiful.
exactly.
Beautiful. Yeah. So I'll pause there, Raul. I saw you come off the mic. I don't know if you wanted to riff on that a little bit more.
Yeah, no, certainly. I think I think one of the things that you had mentioned from a leadership perspective is you need their buy-in, and you need them to also see the benefits. So if they don't inherently believe in it as much as the users, the messaging is not going to trickle down to the rest of the organization. So yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. What can we do quite specifically to help the leadership understand the why and really believe in it? What has helped in your experience?
Well, one of the things and I want to have Raul speak to this as well. He was speaking to the marketing components of it, but what's the press release? What's the FAQs that we send out? This, as we were invited, Raul was speaking to this period of time in 2020 when all this was occurring. That's there's a lot going on there. So people have to be able to answer the question, what's in it for me?
Mm-hmm.
From all those different stakeholder perspectives, from leadership, from the end user to the people that are implementing it, and so in our press release or in our FAQs, we have to have thought through that question that everyone's going to be asking. Before I can enroll myself and get on board, I have to understand what's in it for me. And if I can't answer that question, I'm going to be, a little bit more in resistance or denying, or, I don't want to do this. I'm not on board.
Love it. And this is a reoccurring theme in almost every webinar we've had so far, is what's the value proposition of resource management? And more specifically, if we change something in resource management, how can we prove the value of that? So I would highly recommend also checking out the previous webinar from March with Laura Smith, where we dove a lot into the value proposition. So yeah, it's really nice to see that coming up again and again. So it's really worthwhile to be super clear on the why, the purpose, the benefit, and more specifically, how that translates to different stakeholders along the process. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And if I could jump in here, one of the other things, Kent and Nora, was the fact that one of the things that we did as a leadership group within RBC was to be able to align individuals' goals, like their annual goals and their performance goals, as an incentive tied back to the evolution or any of the innovations that we were doing around resource management, right?
Wow, that's powerful.
This one was, right? So this is tying back the users to the leadership level, and then some of the leaders to their leaders to say, hey, this is how important it is. This is the rewards that it's bringing in. And now you'll have specific targets that you need to achieve. And I think the tone at the top is very key in that perspective to be able to enable good change.
Yeah.
Again,
Fantastic.
human highlighter here, Raul. I love that point. There's the old adage that culture eats strategy. I think Peter Drucker said that, and so I forget who I can attribute this to, but the idea that you were just pointing to is that incentives eat culture.
Yes.
We can have the strategy
Absolutely.
and a culture saying one thing, but if our incentives aren't appropriately aligned, we're not gonna be dialed in.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we just looked at the key leadership qualities crucial for navigating change in resource management, what can you share from your experience? And this is a question to both of you. Can you share a success story where leadership has made a significant difference during a period of transition?
Sure, I could take the first crack at it, and I'm sure Kent would echo a lot of these things as well based on our conversations in the past. So, one of the key leadership qualities was honesty, right? And we needed to see from the leaders that they were able to empathize that their teams were going through the issues. So when I talked about those user stories and the pain points that they were going through in the current state, we needed to make sure that the leaders were able to empathize and be honest. Hey, I do agree with you that we have these pain points. And also the fact that leaders need to be honest about the fact that it's okay to be uncomfortable with the change. So almost getting down to the point where the users will feel uncomfortable and the leaders are going to be okay with their users being uncomfortable. And change is not easy. So it's about having that trust and honesty from the leaders that you're going to go through some changes because you have certain pain points in the current state. And it's okay sometimes to make mistakes, right? And I think that's one of the biggest fears of users is the fact that they're so afraid to make mistakes. But I think as leaders, one of the qualities that they need to bring in is be very candid about the fact that it's okay to make mistakes, because that's how you can enable good change. So I think that would be the first quality that I would mention there.
Yeah, fantastic. So what I hear you say, which I would definitely highlight as well, is to be a role model in this process and really be vulnerable and open, embracing ambiguity and being quite honest that there are ups and downs in such a process, and this is human and okay. Kent, curious,
Certainly.
what would you add?
Yeah, I would add, Raul was touching on this earlier, patience, and persistence. That's an ongoing dance through these iterative changes. We have to be patient and persistent. Too much patience, we get a little lazy and the change maybe doesn't take effect. Too much persistence, maybe we get a little reckless and we're not bringing people along with us. So we're always balancing those tensions of patience and persistence. The beginner's mindset, I heard you all, that vulnerability, being willing to make mistakes. I want to underscore that. Being comfortable with discomfort is, Raul, I just want to underscore that as well. The last thing I would say is being a steward of the language that we use, because the language that we use creates the worlds that we walk into. And so, what's the love story of the future that we're holding dear to as we all continue to be in that creative space towards what we're all committed towards, that future together. And that love story of the future will enable us to get through the inevitable pain and mistakes, because it's worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that term love story of the future, because it's also connecting to our heart, right? So it's not just an analytical process, but the more we can actually embrace emotions in that process, the more human this process will look like, and the more we'll be able to activate people and have their buy-in.
And that's a real thing too, as if you look at all the data around satisfied employees versus engaged employees versus inspired employees, the performance metrics, will point to the value of getting people's hearts enrolled versus just our minds. Raul, what were you going to say there?
Yeah, certainly. And tactfully speaking, when we were going through with the RBC transition, one of the key things that when we talk about speaking to the heart, one of the key things that the leaders did were they were almost cheerleading, right? They were cheerleading their teams to go through this uncomfortable process of change, right? So they were the endorsers, like during town halls and these all hands meetings, to say, hey, we love run users, because this made the users feel valued. It made them feel optimistic about the change, and it made them want to persevere through this time, right?
Fantastic.
And I think that was one of the tactful things that we brought forward, and that has paid dividends, because there is a lot of buy-in when leaders really cheer the team along the journey.
Yeah, I love the role of the cheerleader. Speaks to me a lot. Yeah, because through that they're really creating a space that is safe and where people want to be participating. It's a inviting atmosphere, very safe and welcoming. Cool. And I'm really keen to dive into the employee engagement part. So there's so much to cover here. Let's kick off with, what are some effective strategies to foster employee engagement during major organizational changes? And Raul, maybe you can kick us off, and then Kent, you can complement the points.
Yeah, for sure. So I think, I wrote this down because I was thinking about this last night. And one of the key things that when it came to the employee engagement was what I call tactical, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by tactical is the fact that you want to have the right tactics when it comes to resource management and how you roll things out, and being very practical about it. So I feel like it was a bit of a wordplay between those two, which ended up being practical and tactics. And I think one of the things that we did very successfully during the time to engage employees was we focused on the user experience on the tool and the process. So we spent a lot of time really thinking about how we want to be able to design the process that's going to be allowing users to benefit from the tool, right? So they would go in, how can we make sure that we give them a good starting point so it's not administratively burdensome, but rather they're focusing strategically on how to resource. So in a way, when we're designing, we wanted to make sure that we remove any of the administrative work and
Yeah.
then really have them just focus on what's important and value add. And this really made them feel that, you know, we cared about a process that's going to be forward thinking. And many of us don't want to necessarily do a lot of the number crunching and the administrative work. Rather, we want to focus on what's strategic. So this made them almost a strategic partner in how we can reduce costs and how we can meet demands from a resourcing perspective.
That's
And
so
one of the other
powerful
ways we
because,
all,
yeah,
yes.
I just want to highlight how powerful that is to help elevate the role of resource management, right? From a tactical to a more strategic enabler of the business. And I think this is also a key theme we see in all of our webinars. So it's so beautiful to see how that played out in your context.
Yeah, and I can go a little bit, you know, a bit depth on that too. As like from a practical standpoint, what we did was the fact that we were able to pre-populate run with our projects, and we already have a database which shows who's involved in each project, and we would pre-populate who those people are. So now the resource managers or the schedulers are just spending time really just focusing on where are the gaps and how can we address those gaps. So answering some of those strategic value-added questions rather than, you know, just having to schedule people. So I think that was one of the key benefits to it. And the last thing I'll mention from an employee engagement perspective was the support model. And I think we talked about this in depth, Nora, right? Because
Yes.
one thing is when people are going through change and users are going through change, you want to make sure that there's good technology support. Think about when you got your laptop for the first time, or you're using a new software, or you got a new phone. It's very important to make sure that they feel supported. So when we set up the support model, we had basically a team that's dedicated that would basically support all applications, including Run. So they become the experts on, you know, what's happening in the back end, what's happening on the front end. So they're able to support folks through navigation. So we set up those expertise during that pilot stage to make sure that there's champions who can support. And then from a process perspective, we made sure that our resource manager was equipped to be able to understand why this process is efficient. How can we make this process efficient for the users? And that was one of the key things. So as from a support model perspective, our resource manager, the one dedicated individual, was basically the key person that all schedulers can come to answer any questions that were related to the process. How can we go about requesting external resources? How can we understand if there is certain availability in another team? So those questions can be easily answered by the resource manager. And we also set up sort of these intra sites for people to be able to go and see FAQs and be able to answer questions themselves. So that was one of the key things that we wanted to make sure that, you know, the people had a dedicated support person that can essentially help them through this change. So that's how we keep the employees engaged as well, make sure that they feel supported.
Yes, remove any barriers that might cause frustration, right? Or might cause like a first bad interaction. I think, yeah, talking about psychological safety, this is so important, right? That I know there is someone who can help me if I struggle. Even if I don't have a problem, it's a good feeling to have. Kent, I'm wondering if there's any other examples from your invaluable experience around like marketing materials. What can we do to really get that buy-in from people when we're introducing change?
Yeah, finding your natural ambassadors within the organization, those who
Yes.
are naturally, innately drawn to the work, interested, enrolled, motivated, and adopt them as brand ambassadors, if you will, role modeling the change, doing testimonials, doing videos, having show and tells, things like that.
Nice.
What else was coming to mind as I was listening? That was the major thing. We had people just self identify. Hey, I want
That's
to
it,
go.
right? Voluntary. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think this is like such a shift because we're coming from a world where we usually tell people what to do top down. And it's so much more effective if you ask who would like to take on this role, or, have people raise their hand and they're naturally motivated, intrinsically motivated. Yeah, such a key shift. And Raoul, from your journey, I remember that you were very well equipped with marketing materials. So maybe you can add to what Kent was just sharing from what exactly did you do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'll sort of highlight one of the things, which was really the testimonials or the ambassadors.
Yeah.
And one of the key things that we had going on for us was that when we have the pilot users, they almost innately became very engaged in the project, that they almost felt like this was their product that they
Nice.
were
That's
taking to
what you
market,
want, right?
right? Exactly.
Yes.
And as we were, focusing on the marketing side of things and scaling this out, they don't want to necessarily hear from a strategy group or from an operations group. They want to hear from the users. So we actually
Right.
took the pilot users into our all hands meetings, into our
cool.
town halls, and had them speak about the experience that Run had brought to them and articulate the benefits that it brought to them and how excited they are about the future that it's going to bring. So I think that was really important, that you take your ambassadors along with you for the marketing, for your roadshow, basically, right? Because you don't want because sometimes, when you have a central group that's going in and telling people what to do, they don't necessarily see that as to be relatable, because we're not the actual users. But when you take a user to be able to speak to another user, I think they tend to relate and sympathize, and also trust what the messaging that's coming from them.
Yeah, I think trust plays such a key role in this. And yeah, there's nothing more relatable than another user, right? So I completely love that. In terms of the
Can I speak to something there real quick, Nora? Just
Please.
around the mechanism around the employee engagement and building trust. We're going to have these early adopters that will serve as ambassadors. Linking back to what Raoul was talking about with respect to patience, we also have to recognize that human beings, when faced with unplanned or unexpected or unwanted change, that we will naturally go through some denial and resistance before we begin exploring the path forward and fully commit. So, the leaders and the ambassadors, back to being able to listen and let people work through their very natural, normal human resistance and denial of change, because the world they once knew is going away. And if we don't allow people to grieve that and work through that process, they never really get to that fully commit place. And so the change initiative, partially completes. So people have to have space to work through that resistance and denial phase before they can explore the new possibilities and that future that they're going to commit to.
Yeah, that's part of the human experiences.
That's right.
Yeah, everyone has their own pace, right? And there might be some people who are more naturally bought in, and that's great. And we can use that spirit for the advantage of the change initiative, and at the same time appreciate that everyone has their own timing, and that's okay as well.
Yeah, so don't blame people that have a different way of metabolizing change, right? It's like
absolutely. Yeah. I feel like we could talk so much more about that. And at the same time, we're coming almost to an end. So I would love to invite the audience to share any questions right now. The beautiful Yeah, I've got beautiful news because both Kent and will agree that if there are any remaining questions that we don't have time for during our live session webinar, we will have an opportunity to answer all remaining questions. So please feel free to bombard us with fascinating questions. We would love that. So I'm going to pick on the question that Pedro shared in our Q&A, which is, can you advise of something you would do better or differently next time you're in a change process and why that's the case? Beautiful question, by the way. Thank you, Pedro.
Yes, thanks, Pedro. I think that's, I saw the question pop up while I was presenting. So I was thinking about this. And one of the key things for us as I sort of reflect back is empowerment. And that was one of the key things that we didn't do. So what I mean by empowerment is the fact that you set up a very hands-on, hand-holding support process and support model. And that's great because people want to be heard, people want to be supported. But to some extent, people should also feel empowered to take ownership of their own sort of fate, right? What I mean is that we wanted the 70 plus schedulers to have more accountability on completing the information in the tool, to be a strategic leader. And sometimes I felt that, when we productionize, we found that people were very comfortable in the tool, but they didn't necessarily take too much of a strategic role in it because they had a lot of hands-on support. And what I mean is that we almost didn't necessarily give them an opportunity to think too much strategically, because very tactfully we made sure that all the information was served to them. So now some of the groundwork that we're doing after implementation is now training them on how to think strategically on their own. So the resource manager has less of a responsibility to be able to manage all 70 schedulers. So I think the empowerment aspect was one of the key things we wanted to make sure that we did if we had to do it again. Yeah.
Fantastic point. And I'm almost sure there's something that Kent can probably add from his experience that might be valuable on that point of empowerment.
Yeah, empowerment. And this is back to the point I was making about it's our role as leaders to steward the language that we use. So if we hear people complaining about what's happening, as a leader, I can say, great, I hear you complaining about X. So you must be committed to Y. What's the Y what is it that you're committed to? And change that language from a complaint to a commitment. Similarly, if people are blaming other people for things going a certain way, a leader can say, great, I hear you blaming so-and-so. What can you actually take responsibility for?
Yes.
Right. And rather than going around and fixing everyone as the leader and doing it for people, we coach people. So, there's some cards that we talked about in our previous planning meeting. Through any change initiative, people can move into the drama triangle, where we're feeling at the effect of, the change that's being asked of us. We're blaming the people who are making us do this new thing. And someone's invariably going around trying to pretend everything's going to be fine. And we don't really listen to the underlying tensions that are coming up. And that just promotes ongoing drama in any change effort. So it's our role really to introduce language to shift from blaming to taking responsibility, complaining to what am I committed to, and coaching rather than fixing. Those are all very much empowerment dynamics to get us out of drama related to any change. And I think we have some tools that maybe we can offer some folks around that, maybe. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I was just thinking that. So we will very happily share these cards with you, outlining exactly that shift from blaming to a coaching perspective. So watch out for the email that will follow this webinar. Absolutely. And we've got another question. I'm just checking if there's anything that popped into your minds around learnings and iterations, insights that you gained through change processes and what you might change as a result. Anything else you would like to add on this topic, or shall we move on to the next question?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think maybe one of the key things that I would add on from a learnings perspective is, um, I know we had sort of, a couple of questions around like the lagging and leading indicators of change as
Yes.
well. So maybe I would layer that on. So on a very, practical and methodical way, we need to really make sure that we understand the users that are either using a tool or following a new process. We need to make sure that they're good leading indicators. And the only effective leading indicator that I have experienced so far is feedback and listening to the users themselves.
Mm.
Because you'll start to see the shift in mindset in users as they're onboarding to a new change. So we need to make sure that we're fully engaged throughout the process, listening to folks. So we know when that shift comes that we can actually take it back on. Otherwise, it's going to be too late to bring certain individuals back to that same level of confidence. So it's really important that we track and monitor those leading indicators from the users.
I love it. And maybe just on that, Raul, can you make it very practical? How did you listen and capture the feedback? Like, what were your mechanisms? I think you mentioned like a weekly or bi-weekly meeting with those change ambassadors.
Yes, certainly. So I think one of the things that I will mention is the fact that we pick the people who are going to be the most vocal to be in the part of the pilot. We need the folks who are going to be
Mm.
very transparent and very candid. That was one of the key things. And secondly,
Yes.
we wanted to make sure that we meet on a more continuous basis. So we did meet on a bi-weekly basis to be able to collect feedback. And
Yeah.
a lot of those sessions were just basically, me speaking for 5 minutes, and then the remaining 55 minutes, I was just listening. And I recorded those sessions and I went back and we were
Ah.
able to sort of take out what are some of the key things that folks are mentioning. And 9 times out of 10, you will find that most individuals will be mentioning the same 2 or 3 things that you need to address. Everyone will be going through a very similar experience because organizationally speaking, they would have had to face the same problem in the first place. So yeah, that was one of the key things, just from a very tactical way that we measured.
Yeah, very nice. I love the bi-weekly catch-ups and 5 minutes of speaking time, 45 minutes of listening time. And then I think it becomes quite transparent and obvious what the recurring themes are. So that's very clear. Wonderful. Anything else you would like to add, Kent, on this? On the
Just
understanding the
one,
leading indicators?
just one comment I heard Raul make around finding those that are going to be transparent and vocal. I think it's also important to have mechanisms in place to invite those that are a little more quiet to share their voices, so that those perspectives aren't drowned out by those that are always, willing to grab the mic, so to speak. It's good to have both of those perspectives.
Absolutely. They together create a holistic a representation of how people feel. What are some formats you have come across, Kent, to invite more quiet people to share their thoughts?
Much like Raul was saying, hey, we're going to convene a group of those that we feel are, the cheerleaders and the vocal crew. Like, let's also intentionally gather folks in groups that are less quiet. Maybe smaller groups, so they don't feel, so overwhelmed by a large group. So we've done triads or, smaller groups of, 10 or fewer. So it's not so overwhelming for those that are a little more reluctant to share in large groups.
Yeah, fantastic point. Cool, wonderful. So thank you both very much for your eloquent answers, and thank you, Pedro, for your question. We've got 2 more questions. Feel free also to give questions a thumbs up if you find them particularly interesting, so I can pick the ones that are most interesting for you. I will pick the next one. What can we do to improve buy-in after the fact? Context: absorbed into a larger firm who implemented unpopular system-wide software changes. We have only heard negative things from users. Any ideas on how we can find a way past that? And we'll make it a quick round because we have 4 minutes left.
Yes, no, certainly. I'll make this very rapid. So our organization has actually absorbed some bad systems, and 700, some individuals were not, we're not necessarily resonating with the fact that we're getting another system in place. So one of the key things that we wanted to do first was find ambassadors and start small, and then roadshow as much as possible. What I mean by roadshow is basically take those ambassadors and start to convince one individual at a time, and the message will start to spread. So first, make sure you do your homework and you find the tool that works, and Run was that tool for us. Then you find your ambassadors who will also believe in the tool, and then roadshow. And that's why it was critical for us to spend 8 months, because people were not inclined to go on to another system.
Nice. Any quick answer from your side? No. Okay, perfect. So thank you for that question. And feel free to keep on typing questions if you have any on your heart or mind as we wrap up the session now. The last leap of the day, you two, what inspires you in the space of the future of resource management?
Sorry, could you repeat that, Nora? I'm just
Yes, absolutely. What inspires you in the space of the future of resource management?
Yes, I think for me personally, when I started this project, I realized how much research there is and how much literature has been built around resource management. And I'll go back to the point that I made, is the fact that resource management is now becoming more about automating the administrative activities. And that's why you have tools that are as great as Run in place. And the focus has now been the fact that resource managers are plugged in as strategic partners that's working with leaders within the organization to be able to achieve objectives. And I know that sounds very fluffy, but what I mean by that is the fact that they're strategically involved in optimizing resources, for example. So to be able to know, based on skill sets that people are bringing in, how can we make sure that we position them in the right place? How can we make sure that we can reduce costs by dynamically resourcing within an organization? And also to that point, we want to be able to also think about, when we think about optimizing resources, we're optimizing resources from a long-term perspective. So how can we make sure that we align people's goals into the projects that they're working on, so you can make sure that there's stronger levels of attrition within an organization, so you can keep talent as well. So I think those are the couple of strategic things that I believe the resource managers are really going to be involved in the future.
Very nice. Awesome. Thank you. And how about you, Kent? What inspires you in the space of the future of resource management?
Yeah, as we attend to more efficient systems and processes for allocating people to projects, I also have spent a bunch of time looking at how people can resource themselves and articulate how we are most resourced and filled by the work that we do. And as we take that into consideration, as people become more fully they more fully understand how and where they want to grow, they can align their projects and growth objectives to the organizational metrics and growth objectives. And it's really we're growing together in that way,
Beautiful.
where the folks feel fully resourced in their own choices about their career.
Yeah, that's so empowering. Thank you both very much for that answer. And I would just like to quickly highlight that we have a very lovely session coming up in May 15th. We will be diving into the exciting topic of measuring success in resource management. We have two panelists waiting for you, David Edwards. He's the global head of workforce planning at Ericsson, as well as Marzina Petrius. She's the senior resourcing lead at 10 Clouds. So if that topic is speaking to you, we would love to see you there. And yeah, again, a huge thank you, both Raul and Kent, for your time, for generously sharing from your experiences, sharing the tips and tricks along the change processes you've been involved in, and also for your transparency and honesty on the learnings. I think this is what makes those conversations especially valuable, is really understanding what worked well, and maybe using those insights in the future, and also understanding what didn't work so well, so that we as a community of resource management enthusiasts can grow and just go bigger, grow better together. So that's super nice. Thank you both very, very much.
Thank you for having us. It was a delightful conversation for sure.
Yeah, thank you, Nora. Raul, thanks. Good work, my friend.
Thank you. You too,
Awesome.
Kent.
So I wish you all a fantastic rest of your day. Thank you very much for joining us. And Kent, Raul, and I will dive into the remaining questions shortly, and you will receive a recording along with the follow-up email from this webinar. All right, take good care and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.